Welcome back to DMV Sports Zone.
Chased down by Beal in the corner for three, gets fouled and hits.
Welcome to DC.
Well, they tied him out.
You know we're down at the USA Cup. You're taking us lightly, I'm taking us lightly. Now you don't act on you, we'll be right back. Well, we gon' be right here, we gon' be right here. We ain't going nowhere. Welcome to DC. DC, the home of Chuck Brown. Oh, you don't know the sound? Well, let me break it down.
What's good, DMV Sports Zone? This is Noah in for week 2 for your weekly fantasy preview. As requested, a lot of people asked for me to also include the Baltimore Ravens. And with a lot of the news surrounding that running back and in that epic game we saw last night on Monday Night Football, very excited to include them as well. Before I get started, per usual, as you know, I am the CEO of Sport AI, where we are democratizing the fantasy sports analytics process. If you want to know more about the mobile app that is going to be coming out in a few weeks and helping fantasy football owners everywhere, more information will be into the bio. A quick summary of today's video. I want to make sure it is pretty quick, and I'll hit a quick recap, but also point out the players that are going to be fantasy relevant in week 2, especially as the Washington football team comes in to face the heated rival, the New York Giants. And then the Baltimore Ravens have a big game against Kansas City Chiefs. Running backs will be the big key for both these teams, as well as a few X factors. So before I get into any more of that, let's get started. So first off, the Washington football team, disappointing, not going to lie, against the Los Angeles Chargers. I know they're a lot better of a defensive team, and it ended up being a defensive struggle. But man, that quarterback situation, Fitzpatrick already got hurt. Heineke did show some flashes of brilliance, I have to say, towards the end of that game. And coming into the Giants, Heineke, even if he's probably going to be named starter, Fitzpatrick's not healthy, we do have to be aware, that the Broncos took a big advantage of that short pass game against the Giants. So the Giants gave up 27 points. And they still looked pretty strong. They had a good amount of turnovers. They were a good pass rushing team. So we need to be aware of that. So even if they did lose that game and gave up 27 points, that defense didn't play terribly. They just had a momentary lapse of judgment, which happens. And as they get adjusted to each other, we need to be prepared. So what does that mean for the offensive side of the ball for the Washington football team players? It means Heineke, he should be on your fantasy radar. I don't know if he's worthy of a waiver pickup just yet. If he plays well again and starts this week, then absolutely. Really consider adding him to your team as a backup quarterback or a QB2. But until then, he's best kept on waivers. More importantly, Antonio Gibson. 20 carries, 7 targets. That's the volume that we expected. Like I said, they wanted to use him like McCaffrey, and they're really treating him like that. The only reason that I think he didn't have a bigger fantasy week was the lack of scoring plays. But it wasn't for the lack of trying. They did actively try to get him involved in the red zone offense. They didn't want him to get a lot of big gains. So yes, his performance wasn't great, but again, he's a must-start every single week. So you continue to have faith in him. That volume will break through. It always breaks through for any running back that has that type of volume, especially with Curtis Samuel on IR and McKissick playing a near invisible role as well as Patterson. Almost all the touches are going to Gibson, so he's just a plug and chug at this point. McLaurin and Thomas, as I expected, I mentioned in the previous video, did pretty well on their fantasy debuts. Logan Thomas, like I said, is the end zone target that a lot of people look for, and he did get that touchdown. Will be very similar with the Giants. The Broncos were very exploitable in that short game, as I said, with Noah Fant doing pretty well. Logan Thomas is a must start, and McLaurin is a must start, so nothing much there. The big question for the Washington football team is Hopkins. We don't mention kickers much, but kickers do make a difference. And if this team continues to struggle to score, Dustin Hopkins will be a viable fantasy option. He did very well coming in, kicking a lot of field goals, and showing the accuracy that he actually struggled with in the preseason. So if you do struggle at kicker, I would consider looking at Hopkins. I don't know if he's a waiver pickup just yet. Unless you're really struggling at kicker, then I would pick him up. But Hopkins is like Heineke. You want to see what he can do for another week before you really consider adding him on waivers. But he is a player to watch. Washington football team defense, again, like I said, There's a big difference between a good real-world defense and a good fantasy defense. So they only gave up 20 points, but they weren't that of a high-scoring fantasy defense. A big part of that is the lack of sacks, lack of turnovers, just really solid defense, but anything crazy. But with a offense that goes a lot more in the slants, a lot more quick and go, a lot more runs in terms of the Giants, that allows for a lot more TFL, a lot more sacks, a lot more forced fumble opportunities. And the the Washington football team, again, is trending as a top 10 defense. So even though they didn't have the best performance last week, I would still trust them as your defense this week. Defense is really tricky. You really don't want to play that kind of quote-unquote smart expert game and pick up matchups because, I mean, look at the Steelers. Huge defense, finished as a top 2 defense last week, despite facing the Bills. So you really don't want to play that game. It's funny because I know a lot of people that personally made that mistake. So you don't want to make that same mistake. Just trust the football team defense until further notice. Just keep an eye out on him. One more thing is that Gibson has a tweaked shoulder apparently, but it's not a severe injury. I would still monitor his status, but there's very little chance that he misses this week's game. So like I said, all the existing fantasy relevant players are plug and chugs, including the defense. And then Heineke and Hopkins are your players to watch. If they do good again this past week, consider adding them in deeper leagues. In terms of the Baltimore Ravens, a little bit trickier because Lamar Jackson obviously was the go-to player in fantasy drafts. Had a costly turnover that actually cost him the game. But again, I wouldn't be concerned. Look at Aaron Rodgers, played terrible, but these type of players aren't players that you just drop or give up on after 1 week. So Lamar Jackson is again a must start at quarterback. And then on top of that, even though it's a tough matchup against the Chiefs, they are very vulnerable to the run. The Ravens had success in the past against them. So Lamar Jackson is a must start, obviously. And then Justin Tucker, the kicker, is obviously a must start, arguably the best kicker in football. He's a must start. That Baltimore Ravens defense, however, I really would caution. Usually I say plug and chug for an elite defense, but the Chiefs consistently not only torch elite defenses, but they've torched the Ravens in the past. We saw even the Raiders were able to run down their throat. So they really lean towards Clyde Edwards-Helaire on the Chiefs, and it's something to be really cautious about. So the ranking for the Baltimore Ravens defense isn't great this week. There are a couple other better defenses that will be on waivers. I would really consider looking at that first. So that's the defense I would actually consider avoiding this week. In terms of the offense, I mean, we all know about the running back woes that the Baltimore Ravens are having, with multiple players going down with injury, Dobbins, Edwards, the list goes on, Justice Hill. But we saw that the running game wasn't relatively effective. Even keep in mind, though, the Raiders are a weaker defense in general. They're one of they're bottom 25 when it comes to most of the passing and rushing metrics in football. So that's with a grain of salt. But this Chiefs defense also at times struggles with the run. So then it goes down to this. Is it Tyson Williams or is it Latavius Murray? Latavius Murray only had 31% of snaps, but he had almost equal carries, but more importantly, a touchdown. However, Tyson Williams is also getting a lot of the receptions. So between that battle, Tyson Williams is the better pick. He's still a low-end RB2, high-end RB3, flex play. Latavius Murray, however, must be stashed because I think long-term, very similar to Gus Edwards, he's a power runner. I could see him taking the starting role eventually and then having Tyson Williams more as a two-way secondary back. So Latavius Murray must be picked up at this point and just a wait and see, a stash. But for the short term, Tyson Williams will be the option to look at for the Chiefs if you want to use him over Latavius Murray, but Latavius Murray is a must-stash for anyone that missed out on the Williams pickup. And then you see Marquise Hollywood Brown, very interesting. He had a big touchdown reception. I know he fell in a lot of draft boards. People really don't think that a receiver, especially of his caliber, is not worthy of fantasy pickup. But I'm telling you, in a Chiefs game that's going to try to definitely shut down the run, they're going to start leaning towards heavily Mark Andrews, their tight end, who only had 4 receptions last week, and Marquise Brown. In a game that's going to be a lot more of a pass-heavy game, inevitably, as the Chiefs, put up a lot of points, these are the players we're going to target. So the Ravens are interesting because the Washington football team have a lot more plug and chugs. The Ravens are a lot more matchup reliant, situation reliant. So a recap of my thoughts and Sporty analytical thoughts on the Ravens. Tucker and Lamar Jackson are the plug and chugs. The Ravens defense is a defense to avoid, and then Marquise Brown and Andrews are start players. Andrews is a must start. Marquise Brown, depending on your depth, depending on the side of the league, is not necessarily a must start. They're both going to be in the top 30 in their position. For Andrews, top 10 in the position. Marquise Brown, top 30 or top 35. Take that as you will. That really usually translates into a 10-12 man league as a wide receiver 3, flex play. So overall, relatively safe picks from our hometown teams here. I mean, we not much really to add besides just keep an eye on a couple players. Like I said, most notably, keep an eye on Latavius Murray of the Ravens. Keep a close eye on Taylor Heineke, and then keep a close eye on Dustin Hopkins. Those are the 3 to watch players, with Murray being a must pick up just to be on the roster. Someone's going to pick him up. And all the other players mentioned are must start. So, unfortunately, an 0-2 combined record right now for our hometown teams, but the season is very, very early. We've got a lot of great matchups. New York Giants, obviously a divisional rival, and then a big elite Chiefs team against that Ravens team that has a lot to prove. They think that, that they are Super Bowl contenders. I really do think they are, even despite the injuries, that they can make a deep run in the playoffs. All it comes down to is who will step up for the Ravens on the offense, and more importantly, can their defense hold against the Chiefs? So they're a muscle. The Chiefs, the Ravens are an avoidable defense in fantasy, but in real world, this is a proven game for them. If they can hold the Chiefs to under 27, even 21 points, that's a huge victory for them, and more than likely, they could see a victory as a result. Again, this is Noah. Very happy to do week 2 of the fantasy football recap, and then if you want the power of Sport AI in your hands to help you win your fantasy league, again, more information in the bio.